He said, we're not there yet, but it could. You're like,
it's getting close.
You don't think we're there yet.
Well, yeah.
You don't think we've crossed that line where, like, it might be doing some things that they wouldn't otherwise do without a U.S. backing.
Well, real quick, I want to backtrack real quick. Just time-wise, just a quick 5 minute. You want to give a quick history of Israel? Because I think a lot of people don't quite understand. They just hear it was always their lands, God choosing people. They don't understand what it started in 1897 or something, the Zionist movement. And
so
most of us have no damn clue how this all started. We've been spoon-fed slogans, headlines, taught in school, and half-truths by talking heads like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and Dennis Prager. But the raw, unfiltered story, that's been buried. Until now, Dave Smith sits down with Jake Shield on his podcast, who doesn't just scratch the surface. He detonates the mainstream narrative. Backed by Dale Cooper's legendary Deep Dive podcast, this episode is a history class the system never wanted you to attend. From Rothschild's deals to Zionist militias blowing up hotels to the brutal truth behind the refugee crisis, this isn't just information, it's ammunition. If you think you know the story behind Palestine and you know who, think again. Strap in, because once this truth hits, there's no going back. And just a FYI, this video is heavily censored, so watch closely.
Well, of course,
I think
because
you understand this better than me, so I'll let you.
Well, sure. So, like, and because it's really not an exaggeration at all to say that the way they tell the story is, I mean,
they do a good job.
You can't even imagine that they would be so brazen in the way, and like, so they, I mean, I saw both Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager have these videos, like these short videos on the history of Israel, and they got like millions and millions of views on them. And I'm not even exaggerating when they're telling you the history, and the way they go is like, they go, in 1947, the UN voted to give both of them a piece of land. And in 1948, Israel declared its independence. And then all the Arab countries attacked Israel, and somehow, miraculously, Israel won. And like, that's the history. So if
that's what I was taught.
So if you're asking me to give a quick history, like, I just want to preface it by saying, like, obviously, I'm not going to do justice to
what's the podcast you recommended that you said was amazing?
Dude,
Daryl
Cooper's Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem on the Martyr Made podcast. It's incredible. It's a long, it's a time commitment, but he goes through the whole history, and it's really does a phenomenal job.
It's not a 5 minute thing, but just I wanted to give you a couple points real quick for the audience.
So essentially, right, what it is that all this stuff about that Ben Shapiro and Dennis Prager are saying, this is all bullshit. This is not what happened. All the slogans, which are very nice and they sound really good, and there's a land without people for a people without land. Like, who could argue with that, right? Right. Except it's just a bold-faced lie.
Slogans.
But right. So essentially what happened is in Eastern Europe in the late 1800s, which was a time of a lot of, say, radical new political theories being worked out. There was the early Zionists came out, and so basically Herzl and a bunch of the other guys with it, and their view was that they wanted to start a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which of course was where their holy sites are, and according to the holy book. Now, what's kind of interesting here, right, is that these were a bunch of Eastern European atheists.
That's what I always laugh at. They're atheists, European descent, saying that was God gave them that land.
Now, I will say, if you can for a second, however you feel, and I would guess your audience skews to be more critical of Israel than friends of them.
I would think so.
But I would say, even if as a critic of Israel, you could kind of step back and appreciate that this was a group of poor atheists who had never been to Palestine and wanted to start a country around a religion that they did not believe in, around a language that they did not speak. Like, they didn't even speak Hebrew.
Yeah.
They ended up doing it. And there's a lot to that story of how they actually pulled this off, which is pretty amazing. A lot of it has to do with getting,
I'll give them that.
Well, a lot of it has to do with getting very powerful international financing behind it, but this was their goal, and they started to put this plan into action. And the major problem that they had was that there were already people who inhabited the land. They didn't very much care for getting kicked out of their land, and there were as the early Zionist settlers started to move in. And they were being more and more brazen about their plans of making this their state. More and more conflict started rising up. Ultimately, after World War I, The Ottoman Empire collapsed. The British Empire ended up taking control of Palestine under a League of Nations mandate. During World War II, there had been conflicts this whole time, but during World War II, the British trying to, they were essentially, the British in World War I committed to facilitating
They made some kind of deal probably for money, right? To give them, but they promised it to both sides.
Well, yeah, they were promising everyone everything. They promised Syria Arab independence. They promised Syria to the French. They promised Palestine to the Arabs. They promised it to the Jews.
Yeah,
they were just trying to raise money. Well, look, and you're in the middle of a world war. You're like, first things first, let's win this war. Then we'll figure out what's up. We'll figure out what's up afterward, right? But so the Balfour Declaration, right, was written by Lord Balfour on behalf of the King of England, was written to the Rothschilds. It wasn't written to anyone in Palestine.
Literally to
it was
the
written to the Rothschilds to go, hey, you finance our war, and we'll sign off on this project that you support. So, but there's a lot of resistance from the Arabs who live there. Yeah. So the British are juggling a lot of different things. They cracked down pretty tough on migration during the run up to World War II and in World War II, which really pissed the Zionists off there because they saw that rightfully as their best opportunity to get people to move to Israel, which was their big project. Then the early Zionists, basically, they were run by these like terrorist militia groups, the Irgun, Lehi, Haganah. They were these vicious, very well financed, very well trained. So like in all those Dennis Prager videos where they're like, all these Arab nations attacked these good little Jewish boys and they beat them all. That's already where like your eyebrow should be raising. Like, wait, how did you beat them all? Well, this is how they beat them all, because they were badass, well-funded, well-trained militias who had embraced terrorism, were committing acts of terrorism to drive out the occupying British, which is like one of the ironies of this whole story that can't be lost.
Something really crazy that's interesting. This was during World War II. So the Britain was fighting Germany for the Jews, and Jews fighting Britain in Israel.
Yeah.
How crazy is that? And they say no one came to defend us because they were literally in war with Britain, who was war with Germany at the exact same years. That's so crazy to me.
Well, it is true in a sense that no one came to defend a lot of the Jews were stranded in Europe, but at the same time, right, then there's this other side of the story. And another interesting little like kind of note of history is that the Stern Gang, who was one of those terrorist militia groups in Israel, I believe they met with Nazi officials once, and I think they were trying to work out a partnership with them because they liked what Adolf Hitler was talking about. Now, I don't know. I don't think they liked what Adolf Hitler did at the end of the war. No. Like, I don't think they were like on board with the genocide. But when Adolf Hitler's plan originally was kick all the Jews out of Europe, the Zionists were like, hell yeah, that's our plan too. Get them all over here.
Well, they even sunk a ship of Jews that were getting left. That's how ruthless these people were. So they would kill Jews too. It was any means possible.
Oh yeah.
You might remember the ship, but they sunk this ship.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Because it was getting sent away, and they blew up the ship, and it killed a couple hundred Jews.
Yeah, they were like real hardcore guys.
Yeah, they bombed the King David Hotel, killing
they killed
people.
Killed a bunch, including
British,
Jews and a bunch of British. Yeah. So then, in essentially by 1947, right? So this is after King David, all the terrorists and all that shit. The British basically just throw up their arms and they're like, dude, the empire's crumbling after World War II. They're done. They kick it over to the UN. It had just been created. And they throw it to the General Assembly. And the General Assembly, after a lot of, let's just say a lot of unethical persuading, a mix of bribery and threats.
Yeah, you know, killing a lot of people too.
Yeah, there's a mix of both of them. They end up they didn't have the votes, but they ended up bribing / threatening their way to getting the votes, even though no one within hundreds of miles of Palestine voted for it. Like it was all like European and powers and stuff. But so they vote to recommend, which is just a recommendation because the General Assembly has no authority to create nations. So they voted to recommend that the Jews get 56% or something like that of the land, and the Arabs get the 44%. And the Arabs rejected it immediately because the Jews were a minority of the population there. They didn't own the majority of the land. Like there was no justification for it. And then essentially, like conflict started breaking out right away. There was like fighting in the streets. It escalated and escalated. The Jewish Zionist terrorist militias went around committing atrocities, forcing people out of their homes, and in the end, somewhere in the ballpark of 750,000 Palestinians were kicked out of their homes and never allowed to return. And so this is what created the refugee crisis to begin with. Then fast forwarding to 1967, Israel launched a preemptive war against Egypt. Then Jordan joined in. Now, you could debate, as there's lots of debate back and forth. I mean, Egypt was mobilizing their troops, and it was a bit of a provocation. I don't know exactly what the right move there was, but it wasn't the Palestinians. No. It was the Egyptians and then the Jordanians. It wasn't the Palestinians who attacked Israel. And they just took over. They took over Gaza and the West Bank, and they've occupied it ever since.
Yeah, so they've been living as refugees this whole time. You don't realize.
Ever since, and they live as subjects of Israel with no rights whatsoever, and that has been the status quo since 1967. Get into the weeds about the pullout in 2005. Like, if we had more time, we could go into all of that. But essentially, it's all bullshit, and they've been dominating the Palestinians ever since then.
And also, they've been heavily armed the whole time. Like, even back, Meyer Lansky was sending them weapons. Now America sends them the best weapons. So that's why they've been able to massacre. They have the best weaponry.
Yes. And they could, and I'm not like an expert in like military like hardware or anything like that.
Yeah, me neither,
but I've listened to several of them who are like, they couldn't conduct a month of this war without us. It's all us. It's our weapons, our intelligence, all of it is completely necessary for them to do it. So America is like 100% implicated in all of the horrors of what's happened for the last year.
Being an American citizen and then watching all these kids being killed, knowing I'm paying for it. It's not fun.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's look, obviously, America, we've fought in a lot of wars over the last 20 plus years. All of them, Israel supported and wanted us to fight.
When they push us into them, especially Iraq.
Well, they certainly were.
When the smoke clears, two things become painfully obvious. First, as Dave Smith laid it out, the sanitized bedtime story we were once told about 1948 is nothing but a PR. The truth, Zionism was a European project built by atheists armed to the teeth and sold to the world with bribery and bloodshed. When Jake Seals drove it home, none of this chaos could continue without US backing. The bombs don't fall, the drones don't fly, and the oppression doesn't last without our tax dollars. So the question isn't what happened over there, it's why are we paying for it? If you found your mind blown like mine, or disturbed, or just finally awake, don't scroll past this. Drop a comment, share this video, because the truth will never go viral unless you make it.